This brings up the idea of the creative process. And the creative process is something that we'll be, kind of working on throughout this entire semester, because really the way that composition lessons work, whether it's the way that we're doing it, or if we were doing it one-on-one, or if you were at a different school with a different professor, or learning from a book, or however you're doing it, teaching someone how to compose is not teaching someone how to compose, it's teaching someone how to learn to compose. Because my process will be very different from your process, and your process will be very different from the process of your colleagues. My process isn't even the same every piece. There are other pieces, there are some pieces that I write one way, and there are other pieces that I write a completely different way. And there's no problem with that. It's just this class and learning composition in general is about learning to find the tools to create, to pull music out of your head and get it, on paper and get it into the heads of your listeners. And so I want to talk a little bit about the creative process in general, because, and in music in specific, because there's a lot of research that has gone into the how people create, and brain science and memory and things like that. And the simple uh, statement, I suppose, about the creative process in music, about how it works, is, well, we don't know yet. We're still working on that as a field. Music cognition is a fairly new field, and we don't really know how people create. We have some ideas. There are some books that might be of interest. There's Music, The Brain in Ecstasy. There is This Is Your Brain on Music. There's a book called Sweet Anticipation, about anticipation, and then satisfying that anticipation through music specifically. But we don't really know how people create. We kind of just know that people do. What we do know, however, is, there's a couple of models for creativity, and the one that I really kind of subscribe to is the model created by Graham Wallace in around the 19 teens. And his is a four-step process. The first step is preparation, and he applied this equally to creative works, or to like scientific or mathematical works, or just basically how people create anything. So his first step was preparation, kind of the statement of the problem, the hypothesis of the scientific method, if you will. Where in music this might look something like, I want to write a piece for string quartet and piano, and I want it to be I want it to be about 6 or 7 minutes in length. I want it to be kind of a jazz influence thing, with maybe a big piano cadenza in the middle, and it's going to be really rhythmically driven, and so on and so forth. And you kind of create, you address the big questions that I'm going to ask you to start addressing for your final project. What is this piece going to be about? What's it going to be for? Approximate scope, things of that nature, kind of the metadata of the piece. The second step is incubation. Incubation is hard to describe, because it's entirely unconscious. It's unconscious or subconscious, working on the piece, or working on the problem, where kind of the idea that it's just working in the back of your mind, and it'll come forth into the consciousness when it's ready. I realize that's kind of really esoteric, but there is a lot of stuff going on up here that we're not necessarily thinking about, where all of a sudden we will wake up wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh yes, of course, it's not a string quartet piece, it's a saxophone quartet and piano piece. Aha! That leads us to the third step, which is illumination. Illumination is the conscious working out of things, where you're like, now that I know that this is a saxophone quartet piece, all of that work that I had been working on now makes a whole lot more sense, and you do all of the conscious work of trying to figure out, okay, how do I write this music? The final step is verification. And verification is a word that works much better when we're talking about the scientific and mathematical sides of being creative, where it's like, oh, I'm trying to find an equation that will, you know, or an equation or an algorithm that'll solve this problem. You come up with it, and then you have to verify to make sure that it works. Verification doesn't quite fit what we're doing in you know, creative arts. Uh, you know, you don't really go, oh, did this saxophone quartet and piano piece, you know, solve the problem that I had in preparation? We kind of go, well, was this what I meant to do? And that's where intent in the first lecture comes in with what you'll be doing for your final project, where I ask you to write an intentional work. I don't want you to say, I'm going to write a 3-minute piece for piano, and it turns out you've written a 10-minute piece for choir, because, you know, I want you to start by saying what you're going to do, and then this idea may change, of course, but, you know, but the idea is to focus your efforts and to what you're writing, and to write something that you mean to write. So if the idea changes over time, that's fine, but let's try to keep it in the same ballpark. You know, I mean, you certainly wouldn't say, I meant to write a piece for string quartet and I accidentally wrote the quadratic equation, partially because that's already a thing.